On September 11th, 2001, nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in the deadliest assault on American soil since Pearl Harbor. The attack was carried out by Al-Qaeda members under the leadership of Osama bin Laden. They successfully hijacked 4 American airliners, crashing 2 into the World Trade Center in New York City, crashing 1 into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and 1 was brought down by passengers in a Pennsylvania field. Shortly after the attacks, the United States launched an invasion of Afghanistan to root out the militants who brought such terrible suffering to our shores. Now, this is where public knowledge tends to stop. What I've just said is generally common knowledge in the United States. But here we are, 11 years after the war started, and hardly anyone can tell you what has happened since October 2001. Sure, most people know we killed Osama bin Laden, but how many people know how many soldiers we currently have in Afghanistan? How many people even know who we're fighting and what we're fighting for? The majority of Americans can't even answer one of these questions, and I believe that, ladies and gentlemen, is terrifying. Ignorance does not do our nation's valiant heroes justice. Ignorance, when it comes to our nation's longest war, is dangerous. I believe every American should know what their nation's military is doing and should not ignore the facts. An informed public is better than an ignorant public. A public that is keenly aware of our military ventures is more likely to be involved, make their opinions heard, and hold this country to the standards suitable for the greatest nation on earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't seek to argue for or against our commitment in Afghanistan. I just seek to spread factual information because I believe if we can turn a blind eye to Afghanistan, we may turn a blind eye to something in our country's future much more perilous. Knowledge is power, and I aim to remain a citizen of the most powerful nation on earth. After the 9/11 attacks, President Bush ordered Mullah Omar and his Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden and his fighters. Omar declined, and so on October 7th, 2001, Operation Enduring Freedom was launched. The original goal of the mission was to destroy Al-Qaeda training camps, capture or kill bin Laden and his followers, and to squash any terrorist activity inside the country. October 7th began with airstrikes and a deployment of a small number of Special Forces soldiers. The Taliban government was routed within 6 weeks, and Al-Qaeda's infrastructure was smashed. Unfortunately, bin Laden was able to slip through the teeth of the invasion and was not found until 2011. Once in Afghanistan, the United States and her allies began deploying an increasing amount of soldiers with the mission to provide security and establish a functioning democracy inside of Afghanistan. Security in Afghanistan was needed and still is needed because of the insurgency throughout Afghanistan, most notably in the south and east of the country. Although the Taliban were beaten badly in the first 6 weeks of the war, they began to resurge and mount insurgent-type attacks instead of conventional attacks. There are several reasons why the insurgency was and still is so hard to defeat inside of Afghanistan. The first reason is tactics. An insurgency fights largely indirectly, in small numbers, never out in the open, face-to-face like the battlefields of World War II. This allows the Taliban to not be wiped out in handfuls of pitched battles, but to still have a violent presence. An insurgency also relies on public opinion to thrive. The Taliban intimidates locals and offers governmental services like swift justice that the pro-American regime in the capital, Kabul, cannot deliver. The second reason is the world soon lost interest in Afghanistan. In 2003, the United States launched an invasion of Iraq that filled the headlines of the world press for years, while Afghanistan received little media or military attention. In that time, the Taliban was able to make a significant comeback in the southern part of Afghanistan, particularly the provinces of Helmand and Kandahar. The war in Afghanistan stagnated largely up until 2008, when President Obama authorized a tremendous troop surge that would deploy under the strategy of counterinsurgency in the south and counterterrorism in the east. Despite regaining a large foothold in the south, the Taliban were again routed by the American, British, and Afghan National Army coalition. The counterinsurgency strategy called for the coalition to embed themselves inside the population, instead of camping at remote bases removed far from the population. This strategy removed the tool of intimidation from the Taliban by protecting the population around the clock. It also allowed for the coalition to build critical infrastructure, schools, and allow for democratic proceedings. In the east of the country, the Taliban continues to have a large presence. The counterterrorism strategy is much different than the counterinsurgency strategy. Counterterrorism calls for surgical strikes against specific Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders and leaves most coalition troops out of harm's way the majority of the time. So where does Afghanistan stand today? Security has greatly improved across the nation, except in the east. Girls are allowed many rights previously denied under the Taliban regime, including an education and the right to hold office. Afghanistan has a democratically elected president, Hamid Karzai, and Al-Qaeda's presence in the country has been all but destroyed. However, not everything is bright. Insurgent attacks are still a daily occurrence, many of them sponsored by neighboring Pakistan and Iran, who seek to keep Afghanistan unstable. As of January 3, 2012, 3,069 coalition soldiers have died, including 1,996 Americans. The war has cost more than $600 billion. By the end of this year, all 112,000 coalition troops will be out of the country. The war in Afghanistan will be over for us. Now, with the knowledge you now have, it is your job to formulate opinions and to be competent Americans, as this nation's next generation of leaders steer this country in the right direction. Thank you.